The floorboards of the Midoriya apartment did not simply creak. They groaned in a desperate, splintering agony every time Izuku took a step. It was a brisk April morning in Mizurufu, and 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya was awake. He sat up in his bed, the mattress protesting loudly under his immense weight. To say Izuku was large for his age would be the greatest understatement of the 21st century. At 14, he stood a towering 6 feet, 5 inches tall, a staggering 195 centimeters, and he was still growing. But it wasn't just his height that made him an anomaly. It was his sheer mass. Izuku was built like a mythological titan. His shoulders were wider than the door frames of his home, his chest was a barrel of thick, dense muscle, and his limbs looked like they had been chiseled from old-growth oak. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. His feet, far too large for any commercially available slippers, met the tatami mat. He stood up, instinctually hunching his shoulders and bowing his head. It was a habit born of necessity. If he stood completely straight, his unruly mop of dark green hair would brush the ceiling. Thump. 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 His heavy footsteps echoed through the small apartment, vibrating the framed pictures on the walls. "Good morning, Izuku!" A cheerful voice called out from the kitchen. Izuku ducked under the doorway of his bedroom, his broad shoulders scraping both sides of the frame. He carefully navigated the narrow hallway, moving with a delicate, almost agonizingly slow precision. He possessed a terrifying amount of physical strength, a raw, kinetic power that surged through his dense musculature. If he wasn't careful, he could rip the handles off doors, crush ceramic mugs into dust, and shatter floor tiles simply by walking too fast. He entered the kitchen to find his mother, Inko Midoriya, standing at the stove. Compared to her son, Inko was a woman of remarkably average stature. She had the same dark green hair and the same wide, expressive eyes, but that was where the physical similarities ended. Yet, despite the comical contrast in their sizes, there was a warmth between them that filled the cramped room. "Good morning, Mom," Izuku replied, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in his chest. He pulled out a reinforced steel chair, a custom piece Inko had ordered after he had accidentally flattened 3 standard wooden chairs just by sitting on them, and carefully lowered his massive frame into it. "I made your favorite," Inko said, turning around with a smile. She used a small degree of her telekinetic quirk to float a veritable mountain of food over to the table. There were a dozen eggs, 2 whole grilled fish, a massive bowl of rice that could have fed a family of 4, and a steaming pot of miso soup. Izuku's metabolism was a roaring furnace. His body demanded fuel constantly. "Thanks, Mom," Izuku said softly. He picked up his chopsticks. In his giant, calloused hands the wooden utensils looked like mere toothpicks. He handled them with the utmost care, a gentle giant terrified of breaking the fragile world around him. As he ate, Inko watched him with a mixture of immense pride and deep, lingering sorrow. Society looked at Izuku and saw a monster. They saw a terrifying, hulking brute who must possess some violent, destructive mutant-type quirk. But Inko knew the truth. And the medical records confirmed it. Izuku Midoriya was quirkless. He possessed the extra joint in his pinky toe. He had no quirk factor in his blood, no biological mechanism to emit fire, move objects, or alter reality. The doctors had been baffled by his physiology. His muscle fibers were dozens of times denser than a normal human's. His skin was practically impervious to standard needles, requiring specialized titanium equipment just to draw blood. His bone structure was monstrously thick. "It is not a quirk," the specialist had told a tearful Inko a decade ago. "It is an anomaly. A genetic throwback." There are scattered records from centuries past, long before the dawn of quirks, of a bloodline of humans possessing giantism and unfathomable physical resilience. But as for a quirk, he has none. In a world where 80% of the population possessed a superpower, Izuku had nothing but his gargantuan body. And in a society that valued flashy, heroic abilities, a massive, quirkless boy was a target for both fear and ridicule. Izuku finished his breakfast in record time, carefully setting his bowls down. "I should get going, Mom. I don't want to be late for school." Inko walked over, reaching up on her tiptoes to straighten the collar of his school uniform. Finding clothes that fit him was a nightmare. His middle school uniform, the standard black gakurin, had to be custom-tailored every few months, stretched to its absolute limits over his broad chest and thick biceps. "Have a good day, sweetie," she said softly. "And remember, keep your head down." "I always do," Izuku murmured, offering her a small, timid smile. He grabbed his bright yellow backpack, which looked comically tiny against his broad back, and ducked out the front door. The morning commute to Aldera Junior High was an exercise in isolation. As Izuku walked down the bustling streets of Mizurufu, the crowds naturally parted for him. It was an involuntary reaction. People sensed the sheer, overwhelming physical mass moving toward them and stepped aside. Commuters glanced at him from the corners of their eyes. "Look at the size of that kid. Must be a powerful heteromorph. I bet his quirk is terrifying. Keep your distance, you don't know what his temper is like." Izuku heard the whispers. He always heard them. He kept his eyes glued to the pavement, his large hands gripping the straps of his backpack. He tried to make himself look as small as possible, hunching his broad shoulders and keeping his chin tucked against his chest, but there was no hiding a 14-year-old who was built like a tank. Suddenly, a loud explosion echoed from the nearby Tatooine station. Izuku's head snapped up, his green eyes widening with familiar excitement. The timid, self-conscious teenager vanished, replaced instantly by a fanatic. A villain attack! His long legs ate up the distance as he jogged toward the commotion. A massive crowd had gathered at the railway crossing, held back by local police. In the center of the intersection stood a gargantuan villain, a man with a quirk that allowed him to transform into a hulking, shark-like monster. He was swatting at power lines, roaring in defiance. Izuku squeezed his way through the back of the crowd, naturally peering over the heads of the adults in front of him. "Who's fighting?" Izuku muttered to himself, his deep voice barely a whisper. "Kamui Woods? And Backdraft is on rescue." He swung his backpack around and carefully extracted a charred, battered notebook. On the cover, written in neat, blocky letters, were the words, "Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. Izuku possessed an analytical mind that was just as dense and powerful as his body. Because he lacked a flashy power of his own, he compensated by obsessively studying the quirks of pro-heroes and villains alike. He noted their reaction times, their weaknesses, the kinetic limitations of their abilities. With a tiny pencil held delicately between his massive thumb and forefinger, Izuku began to scribble notes at lightning speed. Just as Kamui Woods was about to use his ultimate move, a giant woman plummeted from the sky, delivering a devastating flying kick to the shark villain's jaw. "Canyon cannon!" The shockwave rattled the windows of nearby buildings. Izuku's eyes sparkled. "A new hero! Auntie lady." She had a gigantification quirk. For a brief, irrational second, Izuku felt a pang of kinship. She was massive, just like him. But the crowd cheered for her. They loved her. Because her size was a quirk, an elegant, heroic tool that she could turn off at will. Izuku looked down at his own massive, scarred hands. He couldn't turn his size off. This was just his biology. His blood. "Taking notes, kid?" An older man next to him asked, glancing up at Izuku's imposing height. "With a body like that, you aiming to be a hero yourself?" Izuku flinched, instinctively shrinking back. Yes. I want to be a hero," the man smiled. "With a mutant quirk like yours, I bet you could go toe-to-toe with that shark guy easily." "Good luck, big guy." Izuku offered a tight, forced smile and bowed his head. "If only you knew," he thought bitterly. "I'm just a quirkless freak in a giant's body." He closed his notebook, the excitement of the fight draining out of him, replaced by the familiar, heavy weight of reality. He turned and continued his march toward Aldera Junior High. Class 3C of Aldera Junior High was not designed for a boy with the blood of a buccaneer. Izuku sat at the back of the room, his knees practically touching his chin because his desk was far too small. He had to sit perfectly still. If he shifted his weight too suddenly, the metal legs of the chair would bend under him. At the front of the room, their homeroom teacher slapped a stack of papers against his podium. "So, as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures and what you want to do with your lives," the teacher announced. "I could pass out these career aptitude tests, but why bother?" He threw the papers into the air. "I know you all want to go to the hero course," the classroom erupted. Students cheered, activating their quirks in a chaotic display of light, sound, and mutation. Fingers elongated, small fires danced on palms, water jetted from wrists. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher chuckled, trying to restore order. But remember, using your powers in school is against the rules. Hey, teach! A loud, arrogant voice cut through the noise. Don't lump me in with these background characters. I'm not going to be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects. Izuku froze. His massive shoulders tensed. Sitting a few rows ahead of him, leaning back in his chair with his feet propped up on his desk, was Katsuki Bakugo. Ash blonde hair, crimson eyes, and an ego that could rival a skyscraper, Bakugo was the undisputed king of Aldera. He possessed a powerful, flashy explosion quirk, incredible combat instincts, and top-tier grades. The class erupted in angry protests. You think you're better than us, Katsuki? Bring it on, extras! Bakugo sneered, small explosions popping in his palms. I aced all the mock tests. I'm the only one at this crappy school who stands a chance of getting into UA High. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the top hero in the world. And it starts with UA. The teacher adjusted his glasses. Oh, right. Bakugo, you're aiming for UA High, aren't you? But, Midoriya, didn't you also apply for UA? The classroom went dead silent. All eyes slowly turned to the back of the room. They looked at the giant sitting in the tiny desk. The boy who was twice as wide and a foot taller than their teacher, and then, they burst into laughter. Midoriya? You're kidding, right? He doesn't even have a quirk. What's he gonna do, sit on the villains? He's just a quirkless meathead. Izuku hunched forward, hiding his face behind his massive hands. There's no rule against it. He stammered, his deep voice lacking any confidence. The school lifted the rule against quirkless students applying. I could be the first. Boom! A blinding flash of heat and light erupted on Izuku's desk. The force of the explosion shattered the wood and warped the metal frame, sending fragments flying. Izuku didn't budge. The explosion washed over his uniform, singeing the fabric, but beneath it, his dense, thick skin didn't even blister. He simply closed his eyes, taking the blast without a flinch. Bakugo stood over him, his right hand smoking. His crimson eyes were wide with a toxic mixture of absolute rage and deep-seated, repressed insecurity. Listen up, Deku, Bakugo snarled, using the derogatory nickname he had coined years ago. You're worse than these rejects. You're completely quirkless. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, looking down at the furious blonde. Even sitting down, Izuku's chest was level with Bakugo's face. The physical disparity between them was comical. Izuku's forearm was thicker than Bakugo's entire waist. If Izuku wanted to, he could reach out, grab Bakugo by the skull, and crush it like a ripe melon. He had the raw physical strength to snap Bakugo in half like a twig, and Bakugo knew it. That was the root of Bakugo's burning hatred. Bakugo had the perfect quirk. He was supposed to be the strongest. Yet, every time he stood next to Izuku, every time he looked at the sheer, monstrous mass of the quirkless boy, Bakugo felt small. He felt physically inferior to a boy who medically possessed zero power. Bakugo's explosions could shatter concrete, but whenever he hit Izuku, the giant just absorbed it like a sponge, his impossible biology shrugging off the damage. To Bakugo, Izuku was a walking contradiction. A quirkless anomaly that mocked his superiority simply by existing. Kaken. Izuku mumbled, raising his large, scarred hands in a gesture of surrender. I am not trying to compete with you. Really? It's been my dream since I was little, and I won't know if I can do it unless I try. Try what? Bakugo roared, grabbing Izuku by the collar of his singed uniform. He tried to yank Izuku forward, but it was like trying to uproot a mountain. Izuku didn't move an inch. Bakugo gritted his teeth, his frustration mounting. The hero exam is going to chew you up and spit you out. What can a clumsy, oversized freak like you do without a quirk? You'd die in the exams. Bakugo snatched the charred notebook off Izuku's ruined desk. Hey, what's that? One of Bakugo's cronies laughed. Hero analysis for the future? He's really delusional. Kaken, please give that back, Izuku said softly, his voice trembling despite his size. Bakugo sneered. He slammed his palms together, trapping the notebook between them, and activated his quirk. A concentrated explosion blew the book apart, charring the pages and warping the spine. With a casual flick of his wrist, Bakugo tossed the smoking remains out the open window. Izuku's heart sank, his massive shoulders slumping. Bakugo leaned in close, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. Most top-tier heroes have stories about their school days. I want mine to be perfect. I want to be the only one from this garbage school to make it to UA. So do me a favor, Deku. Don't apply. Bakugo turned to leave with his followers, but stopped at the door, tossing a cruel look over his shoulder. If you want a quirk so badly, there might be another way. Just pray that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. The words hung in the air, heavy and venomous. Izuku sat frozen in his ruined chair. A dark, primal anger flared in his chest, a deep, rhythmic beating of his heart that sounded like the distant pounding of war drums. Thump thump. Thump thump. His immense hands curled into fists, the knuckles turning white. He could feel the latent, monstrous power in his bloodline rising to the surface, demanding to be let loose, demanding to shatter the boy who had just told him to die. Bakugo felt the shift in the air. He turned back, small sparks popping in his hands, trying to mask the genuine fear that spiked in his gut as the giant glared at him. What are you looking at? Izuku took a slow, deep breath. He forced his hands to uncurl. He forced his broad shoulders to relax. He closed his eyes, visualizing his mother's smile, visualizing the hero he wanted to be. A hero didn't hurt people. Nothing, Izuku mumbled, looking down at his enormous shoes. Bakugo scoffed, turning on his heel and leaving the classroom, though his hands were shaking slightly. The koi pond outside the school building was muddy and overgrown. Izuku stood over it, staring at his reflection in the water. A giant stared back at him. Broad, intimidating, and monstrous, floating in the water, being nibbled on by the fish, was his notebook. Izuku reached down, his massive hand plunging into the pond, and gently retrieved the ruined book. He shook off the water, sighing as he looked at the smudged ink. That's not fish food, guys, he muttered to the koi. That's my notebook. Stupid Kaken. He tucked the damp book under his massive arm and began the long walk home. He decided to take a detour, avoiding the crowded main streets and opting for a secluded route under an old highway bridge. He needed the quiet. He needed space to think, space where he didn't have to worry about bumping into people or scaring children with his imposing frame. As he walked through the cool shadows of the underpass, his mind drifted back to a memory. A memory from when he was 7 years old, shortly after he had officially been diagnosed as quirkless. Flashback. 7-year-old Izuku was sitting on the floor of the apartment, crying. He was already the size of a normal 10-year-old, his limbs thick and clumsy. The neighborhood kids had thrown rocks at him, calling him an ogre and a villain. They said a quirkless giant could never be a hero. Inko had found him weeping. She had pulled him into her arms, holding his large, trembling body as best as she could. Why am I so big, Mom? Izuku had sobbed. Why don't I have a quirk? Why am I a monster? Inko had pulled back, her eyes fierce and full of tears. She cupped his chubby, oversized cheeks. Listen to me, Izuku. You are not a monster. You are special. You have something in your veins that is older and more incredible than any quirk. She had gone to the bookshelf and pulled out an old, dusty journal that had belonged to her great-grandfather. She opened it to a page depicting a crude drawing of a massive, grinning figure with a sun behind his head. Our family, we carry the blood of the buccaneers, Inko had whispered, as if sharing a sacred secret. Long before quirks appeared, they were a race of people born with the bodies of giants and the strength of titans. They were feared by governments and hunted because of their power. But they were not monsters, Izuku. She pointed to the drawing of the grinning figure. They carried a legend with them. The legend of the sun god Nika. The warrior of liberation. He was said to travel the world, freeing people from their suffering, fighting oppression, and bringing joy to everyone he met. And he did it all with a giant smile on his face. He fought to the rhythm of the drums of liberation. Inko had tapped a slow, steady rhythm on Izuku's broad chest, right over his heart. Thump thump. Thump thump. Your body is big because it is meant to carry the weight of others, Izuku. Your hands are large so you can pull people out of the dark. You don't need a quirk to be a hero. You just need to have the heart of a liberator. And you have to smile, just like him. Just like All Might. End flashback. Izuku stopped walking in the middle of the underpass. He looked down at his massive, scarred hands. His mother's words were the only thing that had kept him going all these years. He had mapped the legend of the sun god onto the modern world. To Izuku, All Might was the closest thing society had to that mythical warrior. All Might saved everyone with a fearless smile. He was the symbol of peace, the liberator of the modern age. I want to be like him, Izuku whispered. I want to save people with a smile. He looked at his reflection in a murky puddle on the concrete floor. He tried to pull his lips back into a confident, reassuring grin. He bared his teeth, trying to mimic All Might's signature smile. The reflection that stared back was terrifying. His broad, muscular face, heavily freckled and scarred from years of Bakugo's explosions, looked less like a savior and more like a bloodthirsty berserker. Izuku dropped the smile, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I look like a villain, he sighed. No wonder Kaken hates me. A sudden, wet squelching sound broke the silence of the tunnel. Izuku froze. His keen ears picked up a metallic clanging behind him. The sound of a manhole cover being pushed aside. He turned his massive body around just in time to see a horrific sight. Emerging from the sewer drain was a towering mass of dark, putrid sludge. 2 bulbous, manic eyes and a jagged mouth formed within the liquid chaos. It smelled of raw sewage and rotting garbage. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, the sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and guttural. The villain's eyes locked onto Izuku, widening in absolute shock and avarice. No. Wait. Look at the size of you. Look at that meat suit. It's incredible. You're a titan. Izuku took a step back, his giant frame trembling. A villain. Right here. And there were no heroes around. Don't run, kid! The villain cackled, launching itself forward like a tidal wave of mud. I just need to borrow your body for a bit. With a vessel like yours, that blonde bastard won't stand a chance against me. I'll be unstoppable. The sludge slammed into Izuku with the force of a speeding truck. For a normal teenager, the impact would have broken ribs and sent them flying. But Izuku's buccaneer biology rooted him to the spot. His heavy boots dug into the concrete, grooving the pavement as he slid back a few inches. He didn't fall, but the sludge quickly enveloped him, surging up his massive torso, wrapping around his thick arms, and crawling toward his face. Gotcha! The villain cheered, forcing a thick tendril of mud into Izuku's mouth and up his nose. Panic exploded in Izuku's chest. He couldn't breathe. The sludge was forcing its way down his windpipe, tasting like death and decay. He felt the villain trying to hijack his motor functions, trying to force his massive muscles to obey. Stop struggling! The villain hissed, feeling the terrifying resistance of Izuku's biology. Damn, your muscles are dense. It's like trying to pilot a concrete bunker. Just go to sleep. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. No! Izuku's mind screamed. I can't die here! Survival instinct, honed by an ancient, resilient bloodline, kicked in. Izuku's heart rate skyrocketed. The adrenaline dumped into his system, and his heart began to beat with a terrifying, thunderous force. Thump thump. Thump thump. The sound was so loud it echoed in the tunnel, vibrating the sludge that encased him. Izuku raised his massive, tree-trunk arms. His gargantuan hands reached up, grasping the fluid that was suffocating him. A normal person's fingers would have slipped right through the liquid, unable to find purchase. But Izuku was not normal. His physical strength was so astronomical, so utterly devastating, that when he squeezed his hands into fists, he created a localized vacuum. His thick fingers clamped down on the density of the sludge, treating the liquid like a solid mass of gelatin. With a muffled roar of pure, primal exertion, Izuku pulled his hands apart. Rai up! The sludge villain screamed in agony as Izuku literally tore the fluid away from his face. The sheer kinetic force of Izuku's raw strength ripped the sludge out of his mouth and nose, tearing the villain's liquid body in half. Izuku gasped, greedily sucking in a massive breath of air. He coughed violently, expelling the remaining foul-tasting mud from his lungs. What the hell are you? The villain shrieked, reforming its liquid body a few feet away. The villain was terrified. He had never encountered someone who could physically grab and tear his fluid form using nothing but raw strength. You don't have any mitter quirk. What is this physical power? Izuku didn't answer. He couldn't. He was operating purely on instinct. He dropped into a wide, defensive stance, his massive hands raised like a boxer. He was a cornered titan, terrified but refusing to back down. You little brat! The villain roared, recovering its confidence. It doesn't matter how strong you are. I'm fluid. You can't punch liquid to death. The villain lashed out with two massive, whip-like tendrils of sludge. They struck Izuku in the chest, the impact sounding like wet cement hitting a brick wall. Izuku grunted, his feet sliding on the pavement, but his dense muscles absorbed the blow. He threw a desperate, wild punch. His massive fist moved with terrifying speed, displacing the air and creating a loud crack. His fist tore through the center of the villain's mass, scattering sludge across the walls of the tunnel. But just as the villain had said, the hole instantly reformed. Izuku threw another punch. And another. He was a machine gun of raw, kinetic power. Every swing created a burst of wind pressure that battered the sludge, tearing the villain apart over and over again. The tunnel echoed with the thunderous impacts of Izuku's fists. Die! Just die already! The villain screamed, realizing that trying to possess this boy was like trying to swallow a hurricane. The villain abandoned possession and focused purely on offense, launching a barrage of sharp, pressurized liquid blades. The blades slashed at Izuku's arms and face. His thick skin held up better than steel, but even steel could be cut with enough pressure. Shallow cuts appeared on his cheeks and forearms, bleeding sluggishly. Izuku was panting heavily. His massive body required an immense amount of oxygen to function, and the villain had already deprived him of it. The edges of his vision were blurring. He was terrifyingly strong, but he lacked the specific, specialized quirk needed to evaporate or freeze the sludge. Raw strength could only delay the inevitable. Is this it? Izuku thought, his arms feeling heavier with every swing. I'm going to die down here. In the dark? He thought of his mother. He thought of Bakugo's cruel words. He thought of the sun god, the warrior who fought with a smile. Izuku forced his bruised, bloody face into a grin. It was a terrifying, feral, desperate smile. He planted his massive feet, reared his fist back, and poured every ounce of his buccaneer heritage into one final, devastating clap. He slammed his gargantuan hands together with everything he had. Clang! The thunderous shockwave generated by the physical impact of his hands ripped through the tunnel like a localized hurricane. The wind pressure blasted the sludge villain backward, momentarily scattering its liquid form across the ceiling and walls. Izuku stood there for a split second, his chest heaving, his terrifying smile still plastered on his face. And then, his eyes rolled back, his oxygen-deprived brain finally shutting down. The giant boy swayed, his knees buckling, and he collapsed forward onto the concrete with an earth-shattering thud. The sludge villain slowly peeled itself off the walls, reforming into a cohesive mass. It was panting, exhausted, and deeply traumatized by the physical beating it had just taken from a seemingly quirkless teenager. Monster! The villain wheezed, creeping toward Izuku's unconscious body. You're a freaking monster. But now, you're mine. The sludge reared up, preparing to engulf the fallen giant once and for all. Clang! A metallic reverberation echoed from the entrance of the tunnel. The manhole cover that the villain had emerged from suddenly shot into the air, spinning like a coin before clattering loudly against the pavement. A shadow fell over the entrance of the underpass. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed through the dark. A figure stepped into the dim light, ducking slightly to avoid the low ceiling of the tunnel. Fear not, young man, a voice boomed, deep, resonant, and overflowing with absolute, unshakable confidence. The sludge villain froze, its manic eyes locking onto the massive silhouette. The villain's non-existent heart plummeted into its liquid stomach. Standing at the entrance of the tunnel was a man who looked like a mountain wrapped in a white t-shirt and cargo pants. Golden blonde hair, styled into two prominent tufts that resembled a V, framed a face shadowed by deep, intense blue eyes. But it was his smile that defined him, a wide, dazzling, fearless grin that promised absolute safety. For I am here, All Might, the symbol of peace, the #1 hero in the world, cracked his knuckles. You've gotta be kidding me, the sludge villain shrieked, abandoning Izuku entirely and lunging straight at the hero in a desperate, suicidal attack. Take this. All Might didn't even shift his stance. He simply pulled his right arm back. The muscles in his arm bulged, expanding with terrifying, unimaginable power. He didn't use a flashy emitter quirk. He didn't shoot fire or ice. Like the unconscious boy lying on the ground, All Might operated on sheer, devastating physical prowess. Texas. All Might roared, stepping forward and throwing a punch that broke the sound barrier. Smash! The wind pressure generated by the punch was catastrophic. A localized tornado erupted in the confined space of the underpass. The sheer aerodynamic force hit the sludge villain, atomizing the liquid body instantly. The villain's scream was drowned out by the roar of the wind as its scattered remains were plastered helplessly against the brick walls of the tunnel. The gale force winds swept through the underpass, picking up loose trash, empty cans, and even peeling some of the concrete from the floor. Yet, amidst the hurricane, the massive, unconscious body of Izuku Midoriya did not fly away. His sheer physical density anchored him to the ground, his heavy limbs merely sliding a few inches across the pavement. As the winds died down and the dust settled, All Might stood victorious, his capeless back straight and proud. He quickly produced 2 large plastic soda bottles from a nearby grocery bag and began methodically scraping the incapacitated sludge villain off the walls, sealing the villain away. With the villain secured, All Might turned his attention to the victim. He walked over to the unconscious boy lying face down on the concrete. As All Might approached, his permanent smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by genuine astonishment. All Might was a massive man, standing over 7 feet tall in his muscle form. He was used to towering over civilians, but as he looked down at the boy on the ground, he was taken aback by the sheer scale of the teenager. The boy's shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms corded with thick, dense muscle, and yet, he was wearing the uniform of a middle schooler. Goodness, All Might muttered to himself. What a remarkable physique. He must have a very potent mutational quirk. All Might knelt down, his massive hand gently gripping Izuku's enormous shoulder. He gave the boy a firm, rhythmic shake. Hey! Wake up, young man! All Might called out, lightly tapping Izuku's cheek. Come on now, open your eyes. You're safe. In the dark abyss of unconsciousness, Izuku heard the voice. It sounded like the voice from his mother's stories. The voice of the liberator. Slowly, agonizingly, Izuku's eyelids fluttered open. His vision was blurry, his head pounding from the lack of oxygen. He blinked, trying to clear his sight. The silhouette of a massive, smiling man swam into focus. The golden hair. The impossibly broad chest. The smile that banished all fear. Izuku's breath hitched in his massive chest. His heart, which had been beating to the frantic, primal rhythm of survival, skipped a beat. He wasn't dead. He had been saved. Saved by the sun god. Saved by his idol. All Might? Izuku rasped, his deep voice cracking. Excellent. All Might boomed, his smile widening. You're awake. Apologies for getting you caught up in my villain hunt. But you held out remarkably well, young man. Your resilience is truly heroic. Izuku lay there, his mind completely blank, staring up at the smiling face of the symbol of peace. For the first time in his life, looking at the man who represented everything he wanted to be, the heavy, monstrous weight of his giant's body didn't feel like a curse. It felt like the beginning of a legend. The cool, damp air of the underpass swept over Izuku Midoriya's face, pulling him fully out of the dark void of unconsciousness. He blinked rapidly, his large green eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering in from the street. The first thing he registered was the sheer, impossible size of the man standing over him. For the first time in his life, Izuku felt genuinely small. All Might, the symbol of peace, stood with his hands on his hips, his capeless golden age costume practically glowing in the shadows. He looked like a god carved from marble, an immovable pillar of justice. Izuku scrambled backward, his massive boots scraping against the concrete. Ah! All Might! You're really here! In person. Indeed I am, young man. All Might boomed, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He held up 2 2-liter soda bottles, both completely filled with the dark, swirling mass of the sludge villain. And I have successfully apprehended the villain, thanks in no small part to your resilience. You held him off just long enough for me to track him down. Izuku's mind was moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. He's talking to me. The number 1 hero is actually talking to me. My notebook. Izuku gasped, his massive hands patting down his uniform. He found his soggy, charred notebook lying next to him. He practically tore it open, his thick fingers clumsy with excitement. He flipped to a blank page. It was already signed. A massive, sprawling autograph that took up 2 entire pages, written with a permanent marker. Ah! He already signed it. Izuku shrieked, bowing repeatedly, his massive upper body moving like a mechanical piston. Thank you? Thank you so much. This will be a family heirloom. I'll pass it down for generations. Ha ha. A bit of an exaggeration, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. All Might laughed, turning away and stretching his gargantuan legs. Well, I must be off. I need to deliver this fellow to the authorities so they can process him safely. Wait. Izuku's heart dropped. Already? But I have so many questions. Pros are constantly battling time as well as enemies. All Might declared, bending his knees. The air around him seemed to warp with latent kinetic energy. Until next time. Thanks for your continued support. All Might sprang into the air, a shockwave exploding from the pavement beneath his boots. He shot upwards like a golden missile, hurtling toward the sky. But as he soared over the city skyline, something felt wrong. A heavy, localized drag weighed down his left leg. All Might glanced down, his perpetual smile faltering into a look of absolute, unadulterated shock. Clinging to his pant leg, his massive hands gripping the fabric with terrifying, unyielding strength, was the giant teenager. Hey, hey, hey! All Might shouted over the roaring wind. What do you think you're doing? Release me. Your enthusiasm is too much. If I let go now, I'll fall to my death. Izuku screamed, his face peeling back from the G-force. His legs dangled heavily in the air. Right. Of course. All Might realized, his mind racing. This kid, he's incredibly heavy. I'm carrying an extra 300 pounds of dense muscle. I need to land, and quickly. All Might adjusted his trajectory, aiming for the nearest unoccupied roof. He coughed, a sudden, sharp pain lancing through his side. A thin trail of blood escaped the corner of his perpetually smiling mouth. Not now, he thought desperately. My time limit, it's almost up. They crashed onto the roof of a 3-story office building. Izuku hit the ground first, his immense weight cracking the reinforced concrete tiles upon impact. He rolled, his thick, dense body absorbing the fall effortlessly, while All Might landed gracefully beside him. That was terrifying, Izuku gasped, lying on his back, his massive chest heaving. Good grief, All Might sighed, wiping the droplet of blood from his mouth. If you seek an audience, knock on the door. Don't scale the castle walls. Now, I must be going. Knock on the door downstairs and the building manager will let you out. Wait. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the roof. Please. Just one question. Just one. All Might paused, his back turned to the boy. He could feel his muscle forms slipping. The steam was already beginning to rise from his skin. I do not have time. Can someone without a quirk be a hero? The question ripped through the air, desperate and raw. All Might froze. Izuku clenched his massive fists, his head bowed. Society looks at me and sees a monster. They look at my size, my strength, and they think I have some terrifying mutant quirk. But I don't. Medically, biologically. I'm quirkless. I just have this giant's body. And everyone says I'm useless. They say a clumsy, quirkless ogre can't save anyone. Izuku slowly raised his head, his wide green eyes glistening with unshed tears. But I want to save people. I want to be a hero who liberates people from fear. I want to smile just like you do, to let them know everything is going to be alright. So please, can a quirkless person, even one built like a monster, ever become someone like you? The silence on the roof was deafening, broken only by the whistling wind. Izuku waited for the booming voice, the reassurance, the validation he had craved his entire life. But instead, a thick cloud of white steam erupted from All Might's body, obscuring him completely. Izuku coughed, waving his large hands to clear the smoke. All Might. When the steam cleared, the godlike pillar of justice was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man. His clothes hung off his frail frame like rags on a scarecrow. He had sharp, sunken cheekbones, long, unruly blonde hair, and deep, dark shadows around his pale blue eyes. Izuku let out a scream of pure terror. Where did he go? Are you an imposter? Did you eat him? The skeletal man sighed, a fountain of blood spurting from his mouth. I assure you, I am All Might. No way! All Might slumped against the railing of the roof, sliding down until he was sitting on the cold concrete. He looked at the giant, terrified teenager. You know how guys at the pool suck in their gut to look tough? It's like that. Izuku's brain, usually so brilliant and analytical, short-circuited. The symbol. The legend. The sun god. He was a dying man. All Might lifted his baggy shirt, revealing a horrific, starburst-shaped scar that covered the entire left side of his chest and stomach. The flesh was sunken and twisted, a testament to an unimaginable trauma. Izuku gasped, his massive hand instinctively covering his own chest. 5 years ago, All Might said, his voice quiet, lacking any of its former resonance. An enemy did this to me. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed. I lost my whole stomach. All the surgeries have worn me out. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, I look like this. 5 years ago? Izuku muttered, his encyclopedic knowledge of heroes taking over. Was it the fight with Toxic Chainsaw? You know your stuff, All Might chuckled softly, though it ended in a wet cough. But no. That punk couldn't bring me down. This fight was kept strictly under wraps to protect the public. The symbol of peace cannot be seen as weak. I am the pillar that holds up society. If that pillar shows cracks, the villains will rise. I smile. All Might look down at his bony hands. 2. Hide the fear inside. It's a brave face I put on when the pressure is high. All Might looked up, his hollow eyes meeting Izuku's. You asked if you could be a hero without a quirk? Even with a body as uniquely powerful as yours, the answer is no. The word felt like a physical blow. Izuku stumbled back half a step, his massive boots scraping against the roof. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives, All Might continued, his voice brutally honest. Some villains simply cannot be beaten with raw, unamplified physical strength. They have quirks that melt steel, manipulate minds, or control the very air. You have an incredible physique, young man. Truly, it is a biological marvel. But without a quirk to amplify it, to give you an edge, you would only be a liability on the battlefield. You would die. Izuku couldn't breathe. The air felt thin. If you want to help people, All Might said gently, standing up and walking past the frozen giant toward the roof access door, become a police officer. They get a bad reputation because heroes get all the glory, but it's a fine profession. It's not wrong to dream, young man. But you have to be realistic. The heavy metal door opened, and then slammed shut, leaving Izuku utterly alone on the roof. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Izuku stood there, frozen like a statue. The words echoed in his skull, bouncing around until they drowned out every other thought. The answer is no. Be realistic. All Might, his idol, the closest thing the world had to the smiling warrior of liberation his mother had sung about, had looked him in the eyes and crushed his dream. Izuku slowly turned around. He walked toward the access door, his movements sluggish and mechanical. Thump. His massive foot hit the top step of the stairwell. Thump. The descent was a blur. He didn't remember walking out of the building. He didn't remember entering the bustling streets of Mizurifu. He was a ghost trapped in a titan's body, wandering aimlessly. Thump. Thump. His incredibly dense, heavy footsteps echoed on the pavement. To anyone else, it was just the sound of a very large boy walking. But to Izuku, the sound was a mocking rhythm, A slow, funeral march for a dream that was dead. He looked down at his hands. They were huge, scarred from years of absorbing Bakugo's explosive bullying. They were hands meant to carry weight, hands meant to shield the weak. But what good were they? All Might was right. What could a quirkless giant do against a villain who could turn into acid? Or a villain who could level a city block with a thought? I'm sorry, Mom, Izuku whispered to the empty air, his deep voice cracking. The legend. It was just a story. I'm not a liberator. I'm just a freak. He walked for what felt like hours, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. He didn't care where he was going. He just wanted to disappear. He wanted to shrink, to be normal, to be invisible. Boom! The sound of a massive explosion shattered Izuku's spiraling thoughts. The ground trembled beneath his feet. He stopped, his head snapping up. Thick, black smoke was billowing into the sky just a few blocks away. Without thinking, his legs moved. His body, trained by years of chasing villain fights, carried him toward the danger before his conscious mind could stop him. He rounded the corner into the Tatooine shopping district and hit a wall of heat and screaming civilians. The narrow street was a war zone, storefronts were shattered, fires raged out of control, and a massive crowd was being pushed back by the local pro-heroes. Izuku squeezed through the back of the crowd, using his towering height to easily see over the heads of the onlookers. Death Arms, a hero with superhuman strength, was trying to charge into the inferno but was thrown back by a massive explosion. Kamui Woods was useless, his wooden body a massive liability near the roaring flames. Empty Lady was stuck at the entrance of the street, unable to navigate her giant form through the narrow buildings without crushing civilians. It's no use! Death Arms shouted, coughing on the smoke. We can't get close. The villain has a hostage, and the kid's quirk is going berserk. We have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk. Izuku squinted through the smoke and fire. In the center of the street, thrashing wildly, was the sludge villain. Izuku's blood ran cold. The villain from the underpass. But All Might captured him. He had him in the bottles. Then, Izuku remembered grabbing onto All Might's leg. The sudden shock, the struggle in the air. The bottles must have fallen out of All Might's pockets during the flight. This is my fault, Izuku realized, terror gripping his heart. Because I couldn't let go, because I was so desperate for an answer. I let the villain escape. He looked closer at the thrashing mass of sludge. The villain had engulfed someone. A hostage. The hostage was firing off massive, chaotic explosions, trying to blast their way out of the suffocating liquid. The explosions were fueling the fires, making it impossible for the heroes to approach. The sludge shifted, and for a split second, Izuku saw the hostage's face. Ash blonde hair. Crimson eyes, wide with absolute, suffocating terror. Kaken. Bakugo was drowning. The boy with the perfect quirk, the boy who had everything, the boy who had told Izuku to kill himself just a few hours ago, was crying out for help with his eyes. The heroes were standing still. They were waiting. They were calculating the risks, determining that they didn't have the right quirks for the job. They were being realistic. But Izuku Midoriya's blood did not understand the concept of realism. Before his brain could process the danger, before the fear could paralyze his limbs, his body moved. Thump. The pavement cracked beneath his boots as Izuku sprinted forward. He burst through the police barricade, a massive, 195-centimeter streak of black uniform and green hair charging headlong into the inferno. Hey! Kid, stop! Death Arms roared. Are you insane? You'll die. Izuku didn't hear him. The roaring of the flames faded away, replaced by the deafening, thunderous rhythm of his own heart. Thump thump. Thump thump. Thump thump. The drums of liberation. The dormant blood of the buccaneers surged through his veins, awoken by the absolute, overriding necessity to protect. You! The sludge villain gurgled, its manic eyes locking onto the charging giant. The monster from the tunnel. Perfect. Once I'm done with this explosive brat, I'll take your body next. The villain swung a massive tendril of sludge, aimed squarely at Izuku's chest. Izuku didn't dodge. He couldn't. He just braced his broad shoulders and kept running. The tendril struck him with the force of a wrecking ball. A normal teenager would have been snapped in half. But Izuku's incredibly dense musculature and thick bone structure absorbed the kinetic energy. He didn't even slow down. He bulldozed right through the sludge, his sheer mass parting the liquid like a ship cutting through the ocean. Bakugo, suffocating and delirious, saw the giant approaching. His crimson eyes widened in disbelief. Deku? What is he doing here? Why is he running toward me? Izuku reached the center of the maelstrom. The heat from Bakugo's uncontrolled explosions was intense enough to melt the asphalt, but Izuku ignored it. His skin, thicker and more resilient than normal human flesh, blistered but did not burn. Get away from him! Izuku roared, his deep voice carrying over the crackling flames. Die! The sludge villain shrieked, manipulating Bakugo's arm to point his palm directly at Izuku's face. Boom! A point-blank explosion detonated right in Izuku's face. The blast was blinding, a concussive shockwave of fire and smoke. The pro-heroes cried out in horror, certain they had just watched a teenager die. But as the smoke cleared, the giant was still standing. Izuku's face was charred black with soot, his hair singed, and his uniform smoking. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. But he was utterly unbowed. His wide green eyes burned with an impossible, feral determination. Bakugo stared at him, paralyzed by shock. He took it. He took a point-blank blast to the face, and he didn't even flinch. Kaken! Izuku yelled, his massive hands reaching forward. Unlike the underpass, the villain was fully integrated with Bakugo, using him as a meat shield. If Izuku tried to punch the sludge, he might crush Bakugo in the process. He needed to free Bakugo's face, just for a second. He needed to create an opening. Izuku couldn't use a quirk. He only had his body. He only had raw, unadulterated physical strength. He remembered the underpass. He remembered the wind pressure he had created. Izuku planted his heavy boots into the melting asphalt, digging in deep. He reared his massive arms back, his chest expanding as he drew in a colossal breath. The dense muscles in his shoulders, back, and arms coiled tight, packing immense kinetic potential into every fiber of his being. Let him go! Izuku swung his arms forward with terrifying, explosive speed. He brought his gargantuan, calloused palms together right in front of the sludge villain's central mass. Clap! The sound was not a mere clap. It was a sonic boom. The sheer physical force of Izuku slamming his immense hands together displaced the air with catastrophic velocity. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy erupted from his palms. The concussive blast hit the sludge villain like an invisible freight train. The shockwave blew the surrounding fire completely out, extinguishing the flames in a 10-meter radius. It rattled the windows of the remaining storefronts and sent the pro-heroes stumbling backward. The sludge villain shrieked as the wind pressure hit him, tearing his liquid body apart. The concussive force violently separated the sludge from Bakugo's mouth and nose. Bakugo gasped, sucking in a lungful of air. Before he could process what had happened, two massive hands grabbed his uniform. Izuku gripped Bakugo by the collar and yanked backward. With his titanic strength, he tore Bakugo completely out of the villain's gelatinous grip, ripping the explosive boy free with a wet schluck. Izuku pulled Bakugo into his massive chest, shielding the smaller boy with his broad body. You bastard! The sludge villain roared, reforming its scattered mass, completely enraged. I'll kill you both! The villain reared up into a towering tidal wave of deadly sludge, preparing to crash down on the two boys. Izuku stood his ground, his arms wrapped tightly around Bakugo, bracing his thick back for the impact. He couldn't attack without dropping Bakugo, so he would just have to tank it. He would use his giant's body as a shield. I'm not a liberator, Izuku thought, closing his eyes. But at least I could save him. I really am pathetic. A low, resonant voice cut through the chaos. Suddenly, a massive hand grabbed Izuku's shoulder, gently pulling him and Bakugo back. Izuku opened his eyes. Standing in front of him, intercepting the villain's attack, was a towering figure. Blood leaked from the man's mouth, but his blue eyes blazed with a familiar, terrifying intensity. All Might? Izuku gasped. I told you the traits that make a great champion, All Might said, his voice straining but overflowing with power. He gripped the villain's tendril, his muscles expanding violently as he transformed into his muscle form, defying his time limit through sheer willpower. But I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That is the true test of a hero. All Might pulled his right arm back, the air around him practically screaming from the pressure. Detroit. All Might threw the punch. Smash! The force of the punch didn't just obliterate the sludge villain, it altered the very atmosphere. A massive, spiraling tornado of wind pressure erupted from All Might's fist, rocketing straight up into the sky. The wind tore the clouds apart, creating a massive, swirling vortex in the heavens. Izuku and Bakugo were thrown onto their backs, shielding their faces from the gale-force winds. A few seconds later, the sky darkened. The pressure change caused by the punch forced the moisture in the air to condense. Rain began to fall over the Tatooine shopping district. All Might stood amidst the downpour, steam rolling off his immense body, standing victorious over the splattered remains of the sludge villain. The crowd was dead silent for a moment, processing the godlike display of power, before erupting into deafening cheers. The aftermath was a blur of flashing police lights, shouting paramedics, and aggressive reporters. The pro-heroes had quickly gathered the scattered sludge, safely securing the villain once and for all. All Might had vanished shortly after, slipping away before the press could swarm him. Izuku sat on the back of an ambulance, a paramedic trying desperately to clean the soot off his bruised face. The paramedic looked intimidated, handling Izuku with extreme caution, as if the giant teenager might snap at any moment. Kamui Woods and Death Arms marched over to him, their faces stern. "What were you thinking, kid?" Death Arms scolded, pointing an accusing finger at Izuku. "You have a massive body, sure, but charging in without a quirk? You could have been killed. You got in our way. You need to leave the hero work to the professionals." "He's right," Kamui Woods added, his wooden face unreadable. "Your actions were incredibly reckless. A strong physique is no substitute for a proper quirk and professional training. Do not do that again." Izuku bowed his head, his wide shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry. I just moved on my own." A few yards away, MT Lady and several other heroes were crowding around Bakugo. "Incredible quirk, kid," one of them praised. "And your endurance is amazing. Once you go pro, you'll be a top hero for sure. Come to my agency for your internship." Izuku watched them praise the boy who had been hostage, while they scolded the boy who had saved him. It was a bitter, familiar pill to swallow. Society valued the flashy, the powerful, the normative. A quirkless giant was just a nuisance, a reckless anomaly. Once the paramedics cleared him, Izuku gathered his charred notebook and began the long walk home. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the streets of Mizurufu. The city was returning to normal. Thump. Thump. His heavy footsteps echoed in the quiet evening air. "I did it again," Izuku thought, rubbing the back of his neck. "I let my delusions get the better of me. I charged in and made a mess. I should have just stayed out of it." Yet deep down, beneath the guilt and the scolding, a small ember of warmth glowed in his massive chest. For one brief, terrifying moment, he hadn't been a quirkless freak. He had been a shield. He had used his giant's body to protect someone. He had clapped his hands and shattered a villain's grip. He didn't have a quirk, but he wasn't weak. "DKU." Izuku stopped, his heavy boots grinding against the pavement. He turned around to see Bakugo running down the street toward him, panting heavily. "Kaken?" Izuku muttered, surprised. Bakugo skidded to a halt a few feet away. He glared up at Izuku, his crimson eyes burning with a complex storm of anger, humiliation, and a grudging, resentful acknowledgement. "Listen to me, you giant freak," Bakugo snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Izuku's broad chest. "I didn't need your help. I had him right where I wanted him. You didn't save me. Don't you dare think you can look down on me. You're still a quirkless nobody. You hear me?" Bakugo didn't wait for an answer. He spun on his heel and stomped away, his pride demanding he have the last word. Izuku watched him go, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He really hasn't changed at all. Izuku turned to continue his walk home, feeling strangely lighter despite the events of the day. "I am here!" A massive figure suddenly sprang out from a nearby alleyway, sliding across the pavement and blocking Izuku's path. Izuku jumped back, his hands instinctively coming up in a defensive guard. "All Might?" What are you doing here? How did you get away from the reporters? All Might stood tall, his permanent smile gleaming in the twilight. Ha! I stand for justice, not sound bites. I simply outran them. Because I am All Might. Blurg. A fountain of blood erupted from his mouth, and the massive hero deflated instantly in a cloud of steam, reverting to his skeletal form. Izuku dropped his guard, rushing forward to support the coughing man, his massive hands hovering anxiously. Are you okay? Should I call an ambulance? All Might waved him off, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. He took a deep breath, standing up straight. The playful, booming demeanor was gone. He looked at Izuku with a profound, piercing seriousness. Young man, All Might said quietly. I came here to thank you. And to apologize. Izuku blinked, confused. Apologize? For what? For what I said on the roof, All Might replied, taking a step forward. I told you to be realistic. I told you that without a quirk, you couldn't be a hero. But today, while the pros stood by and watched, while I stood by and watched, you were the only one who acted. All Might placed his bony hand on Izuku's massive forearm. You, a quirkless boy, charged into a roaring inferno to save a life. You didn't hesitate. And that shockwave you created, that was purely physical, wasn't it? Just raw, unamplified strength? Izuku nodded slowly, swallowing hard. Yes, sir. I just clapped my hands together as hard as I could. All Might's hollow eyes widened slightly in awe. Incredible. Truly incredible. Young man, there are stories about every great hero. How they became great. But most of them have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku's breath hitched. His massive chest began to heave, a sudden, overwhelming emotion rising in his throat. The tears he had held back all day, all his life, finally broke free. That's what happened to you today, isn't it? All Might asked softly. Izuku fell to his knees. The sheer weight of his body cracked the pavement slightly. He covered his face with his massive hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The words he had been waiting to hear his entire life. The validation he had craved so desperately. You, All Might declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, can become a hero. Izuku wept, the rhythmic thumping of his heart slowing down to a steady, peaceful beat. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a freak. The symbol of peace had seen his soul, and deemed him worthy. All Might waited patiently for the boy's sobs to subside. When Izuku finally wiped his eyes and looked up, All Might smiled. I have a proposal for you, young man. I deem you worthy of inheriting my power. Izuku froze, his tear-streaked face twisting in confusion. Inheriting your power? But quirks are genetic. They're biological traits. You can't just give someone a quirk. Normally, no, All Might explained, his tone shifting into something almost mythical. But my quirk is different. It is a sacred torch, passed down from generation to generation. I was once quirkless, just like you. But my master bestowed this power upon me. The true name of my power is One for All. One for All, Izuku repeated, the words tasting heavy on his tongue. Yes, All Might nodded. It is a power cultivated by the merging of many voices, many strengths. One person cultivates the power, and passes it to another, who cultivates it further. It is the crystallization of the desire to save others. And I want to pass it to you. Izuku stood up slowly, his towering frame dwarfing the skeletal hero. But why me? You're the #1 hero. You could choose anyone. You could choose someone with a powerful quirk to make it even stronger. I'm a quirkless giant. All Might chuckled, looking up at the towering boy. Young man, look at yourself. Look at your body. Izuku looked down at his massive, scarred hands, his thick chest, his trunk-like legs. One for All is an immense, overwhelming power, All Might explained. It is the accumulated physical strength of 8 generations. If I were to give it to an unprepared vessel, a normal person without the proper physical conditioning, the sheer kinetic energy would literally blow their limbs off. Their bones would shatter into dust upon the first use. All Might reached out, poking Izuku's incredibly dense, rock-hard bicep. Normally, if I found a successor, I would have to put them through 10 months of absolute hell. I would have to make them lift weights, drag trash, and bulk up just to create a vessel capable of holding the baseline power of one for all. But you, All Might looked at Izuku with a mixture of reverence and disbelief. Your biology is a 1 in a billion vessel. Your muscle density, your bone structure, your sheer mass, it is unlike anything I have ever seen. You are already built like a fortress. You don't need to bulk up. Your body is practically screaming for a quirk to amplify its latent potential. Izuku's heart began to race. The drums of liberation beat in his chest, a fast, joyous rhythm. His body, his monstrous, freakish body, was exactly what was needed. I won't lie to you, All Might warned, his face serious. It will be a painful process. Even with your incredible physique, mastering this power will test the very limits of your giant's blood. The UA entrance exams are 10 months away. Instead of spending that time building your body, we will spend that time teaching you how to fight. How to control the power. We will forge you into an unbreakable sword. All Might held out his hand. Will you accept this power, young man? Will you carry the torch? Izuku didn't hesitate. He didn't need to analyze the situation, or consult his notebooks. The answer was woven into his very DNA. He wiped the remaining tears from his eyes, his broad face setting into a look of absolute, unshakable resolve. He reached out, his massive, calloused hand enveloping All Might's skeletal fingers in a gentle, yet powerful grip. I will, Izuku Midoriya vowed, his deep voice resonating in the quiet street. I'll take it. And I promise. I'll become a hero who saves everyone with a smile. All Might beamed, squeezing the boy's hand. In the twilight of Muzurifu, a new legend began. The power of the strongest hero was about to be poured into the vessel of a titan, and the world was utterly unprepared for the giant that would awaken. The salty, stagnant breeze blowing off the coast of Muzurifu carried the pungent stench of rotting kelp, rusted iron, and forgotten garbage. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had long ceased to be a place of recreation. Over the years, ocean currents and illegal dumpers had transformed the pristine coastline into a sprawling, apocalyptic labyrinth of refuse. Mountains of discarded refrigerators, broken washing machines, rusted car frames, and shattered tires stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a monument to societal neglect. And it was here, under the pale light of the early morning sun, that Izuku Midoriya's true training began. Welcome to your new gym, young Midoriya. All Might boomed, standing atop a rusted microbus in his skeletal, deflated form. He wore a baggy tracksuit that billowed in the wind. A hero is not just someone who punches villains. A true hero serves the community. This beach has been an eyesore for years. You are going to clean it up. Izuku stood at the edge of the sand, his massive hands resting on his hips. At 14, he was already an imposing figure, a 6'5" wall of dense, unyielding muscle. He wore a simple white t-shirt that clung desperately to his broad chest and a pair of reinforced cargo shorts. Clean it up? Izuku repeated, his deep voice rumbling over the sound of the crashing waves. He surveyed the literal tons of garbage. All of it? Indeed. All Might pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and tossed it down. It fluttered into Izuku's massive palm. I've drawn up an aim to pass, American Dream Plan. It is a rigorous, 10-month schedule designed to push your body to the absolute limit. We have exactly 10 months until the UA entrance exams. Normally, a vessel requires this entire duration just to build the muscle mass necessary to hold one for all without exploding. You, however, already possess the mass. But we must test your endurance, your stamina. You will move this trash, piece by piece, to the designated recycling zones. Izuku looked down at the schedule. It was meticulously detailed, breaking down his diet, his sleep, and his daily hauling quotas. Okay, Izuku said simply. He neatly folded the paper, placing it in his pocket. He didn't complain. He didn't whine about the impossibility of the task. He simply rolled his broad shoulders, the joints popping with a sound like cracking stone, and walked toward the nearest mountain of trash. All Might sat down on the roof of the microbus, a stopwatch in his hand. He has the spirit, certainly, All Might thought. But this is a monumental task. Even with his size, moving tons of irregular, rusted metal is grueling work. It will take him the full 10 months just to make a dent. Izuku approached a stack of 3 rusted refrigerators, precariously piled on top of each other. A normal person would have tried to drag them one by one, using a dolly or a winch. Izuku didn't use a dolly. He widened his stance, his heavy boots sinking into the sand. He wrapped his gargantuan arms around the bottom refrigerator. His thick, callous fingers dug into the rusted metal, denting the steel with his sheer grip strength. Thump thump. Thump thump. His heartbeat quickened, a low, rhythmic drumming that seemed to echo in the damp morning air. Izuku inhaled deeply, his massive chest expanding, and lifted. The metal groaned in protest. The sand shifted. But the stack of 3 refrigerators, weighing nearly 1,000 pounds combined, rose into the air. Izuku hoisted the entire stack onto his broad right shoulder, balancing the immense weight with frightening ease. All Might dropped his stopwatch. It clattered against the roof of the bus. He just... All Might stammered, rubbing his sunken eyes. He just lifted half a ton. Without a quirk. But Izuku wasn't done. He looked at his left hand, which was still free. He walked over to a rusted, waterlogged pickup truck half buried in the sand. He grabbed the front bumper with his left hand, planted his feet, and heaved. With a sound of tearing metal and suctioning mud, the truck was ripped from the earth. Izuku dragged the 2-ton vehicle behind him, the stack of refrigerators still balanced perfectly on his shoulder, and began marching toward the street. His pace was steady. Relentless. Like a glacier moving across the earth. What on earth is his bloodline? All Might thought, utterly flabbergasted. He isn't just strong. His skeletal structure, the density of his muscle fibers. He is operating on the physical parameters of a top-tier pro hero with a strength-enhancing quirk. And this is just his baseline. For the next 3 months, Dagobah Beach bore witness to a phenomenon. Izuku Midoriya did not clean the beach, he conquered it. The American Dream Plan was rendered entirely obsolete by day 4. Izuku was hauling 10 times the allotted weight every single morning. When he found that carrying the trash took too long, he began compacting it. All Might watched in awe as Izuku took an entire discarded washing machine, placed it between his hands, and pressed. The boy's biceps bulged, the veins rising against his scarred skin, and the washing machine crumpled, squealing as the steel was crushed into a neat, dense cube of scrap metal. Izuku tossed the cube into a growing pile with a loud clang. He was a human compactor. A titan of industry fueled by rice, miso soup, and an unbreakable will. The physical labor awakened something deep within his buccaneer biology. The more he worked, the more his body seemed to thrive. The minor cuts from rusted iron healed overnight. The lactic acid that should have paralyzed his muscles was burned away by a metabolism that ran like a nuclear reactor. He was constantly sweating, a thick steam rising from his massive back in the cool dawn air, making him look like a mythical engine of flesh and bone. By the end of the first month, a quarter of the beach was pristine sand. By the end of the second month, half the coastline was visible. On exactly the 90th day of training, All Might arrived at the beach at 5 a.m., holding a new, hastily rewritten training schedule. He walked past the seawall and stopped dead in his tracks. The beach was empty. Not a single tire. Not a single crushed can. The sand stretched out, smooth and flawless, kissing the gentle waves of the ocean. The horizon was beginning to glow with the soft pinks and golds of the rising sun. Sitting in the exact center of the beach, perfectly still, was Izuku. He was drenched in sweat, his white t-shirt completely ruined, his broad chest rising and falling in a steady, powerful rhythm. Young Midoriya. All Might whispered, walking down the steps. Izuku turned his head, a wide, exhausted, but incredibly genuine smile breaking across his scarred face. Good morning, All Might. I finished the last pile about an hour ago. The recycling trucks are going to need to make a few extra trips. All Might looked at the boy, then at the pristine ocean. 3 months. A task meant to take 10 months of grueling labor, and you eradicated it in 3. Your body is a marvel, young Midoriya. But more than that, your spirit is a force of nature. Izuku stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the newly cleared sand. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly shy. I didn't want to waste time. If I'm going to inherit your power, I need to be ready as fast as possible. And ready you are, All Might said, a grin stretching across his skeletal face. He suddenly expanded, a burst of steam heralding his transformation into his godlike muscle form. He stood tall, the number one hero, yet Izuku's eye level was still firmly at All Might's chest. All Might raised his massive fists, dropping into a classic boxer's stance. The beach is clear, young Midoriya. The vessel is built. But a vessel is useless if the captain does not know how to sail. You possess astronomical physical strength, but you are clumsy. You hold back because you are afraid of breaking the world around you. Izuku's eyes widened. I have to hold back. If I don't, I hurt people. I break things. A valid fear for a gentle giant, All Might boomed, the wind whipping around him. But to be a hero, you must learn control, not suppression. You must learn how to unleash your power safely, how to target it, how to move this massive body of yours with the grace of a warrior. For the remaining 7 months, we do not lift trash. We fight. Izuku swallowed hard. The idea of throwing a punch at All Might, even the number one hero, terrified him. He knew what his fist could do to solid steel. Come! All Might challenged, beckoning with a massive hand. Show me the strength of the buccaneer bloodline. Do not hold back. I am the symbol of peace. I will not break. Izuku took a deep breath. His heart began that familiar, primal rhythm. Thump thump. Thump thump. He dropped into a wide stance, his boots digging into the sand. He lunged forward, his massive right fist pulling back. He threw a straight punch aimed directly at All Might's chest. Whoosh! The punch cut through the air with the sound of a cracking whip. All Might caught the fist with his open palm. The impact echoed across the beach like a cannon shot. A shockwave of wind blew the sand away from their feet, creating a shallow crater. All Might's eyes widened in genuine surprise. He was pushed back half an inch. Good heavens! This raw kinetic force, it's staggering. If he connects this with a villain, he'll turn them into mist. Too stiff! All Might barked, gripping Izuku's fist and using the boy's own momentum to toss him over his shoulder. Izuku crashed into the sand with an earth-shattering thud, shaking the entire beach. But before All Might could even blink, the giant teenager bounced back to his feet, seemingly entirely unfazed by the impact. Your center of gravity is too high. All Might instructed, throwing a rapid jab that tapped Izuku on the forehead, sending him stumbling back. You rely entirely on your upper body strength. Your legs are like tree trunks, young Midoriya. Use them. Anchor yourself to the earth. And so began the second phase of Izuku Midoriya's forging. For 7 grueling months, the beach became a battlefield. Izuku and All Might sparred as the sun rose every morning. It was a clash of titans, a display of martial prowess that would have terrified any onlookers. All Might taught Izuku how to throw a punch without telegraphing it. He taught him how to pivot his massive hips to generate even more rotational force. But most importantly, he taught Izuku how to control the devastating wind pressure his raw strength generated. You are creating sonic booms with every swing. All Might yelled one morning, parrying a sweeping kick from Izuku that nearly uprooted a nearby palm tree with the sheer displaced air. Imagine if there were civilians behind me. You must focus the kinetic energy. Do not let it scatter. Condense the force to the exact point of impact. Izuku struggled with this. His body was built for explosive, uncontained power. But his analytical mind, honed by years of studying heroes, began to break down his own biomechanics. He learned to tighten his muscles at the exact microsecond of impact, limiting the follow-through so the wind pressure didn't expand outward. He learned to control his massive frame, discovering a terrifying agility hidden beneath his bulk. He couldn't do acrobatics. He was far too dense to backflip. But he could close distances with terrifying, explosive bursts of linear speed. As the months passed, the dynamic between them deepened. All Might wasn't just a mentor. He became a father figure, the first person who looked at Izuku's monstrous body and saw not a freak, but a champion. All Might also noticed the strange biological quirks of his pupil. During their most intense sparring sessions, when Izuku was pushed to the absolute brink of exhaustion, his heartbeat would change. It wasn't a rapid, chaotic fluttering. It was a slow, booming, rhythmic beat. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. When that rhythm started, Izuku's exhaustion seemed to evaporate. His stamina became practically infinite, his thick skin flushing with a deep, healthy heat. And most strangely of all, when the drums began to beat, Izuku would smile. It wasn't his usual timid, nervous grin. It was a wide, joyous, almost cartoonish smile that seemed to radiate a bizarre, contagious freedom. He fights like a god of old, All Might thought, watching Izuku wipe sweat from his brow, grinning from ear to ear after taking a brutal blow to the ribs. He takes pain and turns it into joy. He was born to inherit this power. February 26th. The morning of the UA entrance exam. The air was crisp and biting, but on Dagoba Beach, it felt like the dawn of a new era. The sun crested over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, bathing the pristine sand in light. Izuku stood facing the ocean, his hands behind his back. He wore a brand new, custom-tailored tracksuit, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. He felt different. He wasn't just big anymore. He was a coiled spring of refined, controlled power. He knew exactly what his body was capable of. Behind him, heavy footsteps approached. "You've done well, young Midoriya," All Might said, his skeletal form wrapped in an oversized trench coat. 10 months. You exceeded every expectation I had. You are a warrior. Izuku turned around, offering a deep, respectful bow. I couldn't have done it without you, All Might. Thank you? For everything. Raise your head, All Might commanded gently. The time for gratitude is over. The time for the transfer has come. All Might reached up and plucked a single strand of golden hair from his head. He held it out between his bony fingers, the hair catching the light of the morning sun. This quirk, one for all, is passed on via DNA, All Might explained, a serious, solemn look on his face. You must ingest some of my genetic material to inherit the power. Izuku stared at the single strand of hair. He processed the mechanics. He understood the logic. But the reality of the situation was slightly absurd. All Might thrust the hair forward, his face deadpan. Eat this. Izuku blinked. Eat it. All Might repeated. We don't have time for a grand ceremony. You have to digest it before the exam starts. Izuku awkwardly pinched the hair between his massive fingers, tossed it into his mouth, and swallowed dry. He grimaced. It didn't taste like anything. It will take a few hours to process through your stomach lining and integrate into your nervous system, All Might said, checking his watch. You should feel it awaken right around the time the practical exam begins. All Might looked up at the giant boy. Listen to me, Izuku. When the power awakens, it will feel like a raging storm inside your veins. It is the accumulated strength of 8 people. Normally, I would tell a successor to only use 5% of the power to avoid shattering their bones. But your body is an anomaly. You are incredibly dense. I theorize you can handle a higher percentage right out of the gate. But be careful. If you feel your bones groaning, dial it back. I understand, Izuku said firmly. Now go, All Might smiled, pointing toward the city. Go and show the world the hero you are meant to be. Yui High School was an architectural marvel, a massive complex of glass and steel that symbolized the pinnacle of heroic education. Izuku stood at the front gates, staring up at the H-shaped building. He was wearing his middle school uniform, which had been let out at the seams again just to accommodate the muscle he had packed on during his sparring sessions. He felt like a titan trying to squeeze into a doll's clothes. Okay, Izuku muttered to himself, his deep voice rumbling. 10 months of training. I can do this. Just stay calm. Don't break the doors. He took a step forward. His massive boot caught the edge of a raised paving stone. Given his height, center of gravity, and sheer weight, his fall was less of a trip and more of a controlled building demolition. He pitched forward, bracing for the inevitable impact that would likely crack the concrete plaza. Suddenly, the sensation of gravity vanished. Izuku hovered horizontally, a mere 2 inches from the ground. His massive, 300-pound body bobbed in the air like a giant, helpless balloon. Oops. Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking. Izuku managed to tilt his head backward. Standing behind him, her fingers pressed together in a triangle, was a girl with a round face, rosy cheeks, and short brown hair. Next to Izuku, she looked incredibly tiny, a stark contrast to his monstrous proportions. But it'd be bad luck if you fell, right? She smiled brightly. She tapped her fingers together, releasing the quirk. Gravity rushed back. Izuku hit the ground, easily catching his massive weight on his hands and flipping upright in a fluid motion that belied his size. He stood up, towering over the girl. Thank you, Izuku stammered, his cheeks flushing pink. He wasn't used to people looking at him with anything other than fear or disdain. This girl just looked at him with polite friendliness. No problem. She beamed. Wow, you're really tall. You must have an amazing quirk. I'm super nervous, are you? Why yes. A little, Izuku managed to say. Well, let's both do our best. See ya. She waved and hurried into the building. Izuku stood there for a moment, a massive, goofy grin spreading across his face. I just talked to a girl. And I didn't accidentally scare her away. Inside the auditorium, the contrast of Izuku's existence became painfully apparent. He had to sit in the very back row, occupying 2 adjacent seats just to fit his shoulders comfortably. Down in the front, the voice hero, Present Mike, was explaining the rules of the practical exam. It was a mock urban battle against robotic villains worth different point values. Izuku pulled out his new notebook, a tiny pencil gripped delicately in his massive fingers, and began muttering to himself, analyzing the point system. Hey, shut up. Izuku stopped muttering. He glanced to his left. Sitting 2 seats away, glaring daggers at him, was Katsuki Bakugo. You've gotten even bigger, you freak, Bakugo hissed, his crimson eyes filled with venom. I don't know what kind of steroids you've been taking, but it doesn't matter. You're still quirkless. If you get in my way out there, I'll blow your giant head off. Before Izuku could respond, a tall boy with glasses and stiff posture stood up near the front of the auditorium. Excuse me, sir. The boy shouted, pointing a rigid arm at Present Mike. The printout lists 4 types of villains, but you've only explained 3. Such an error is highly unbecoming of you. The boy then whipped around, his eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto Izuku's massive form in the back row. And you! The incredibly large student in the back. The boy scolded. You've been muttering this entire time. It's distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, you should leave immediately. The entire auditorium turned to look at the giant. The familiar whispers began. Look at the size of him. He's terrifying. Must be a brute. Izuku felt the familiar urge to hunch his shoulders and shrink. But he remembered All Might's words. You have spent your life shrinking to fit the world. Now you must expand. Izuku sat up perfectly straight. His broad chest puffed out. He didn't look angry. He looked remarkably calm. He offered the boy with glasses a small, polite bow from his seat. I apologize if I disturbed you, Izuku said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that effortlessly carried across the silent auditorium without him needing to yell. It vibrated in the chests of everyone present. I was merely analyzing the mechanics of the exam. I will keep my thoughts to myself from now on. Thank you for pointing out the 4th villain on the printout. I was curious about that as well. The boy with glasses blinked, completely taken aback by the eloquent, polite response from the terrifying-looking giant. He rigidly bowed back. Yeah. I see. Apology accepted. Carry on. Present Mike cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Right on, listener in the back. The 4th villain is a 0-pointer. It's essentially a massive obstacle. Best to avoid it. Now, let's get ready for the main event. Plus Ultra. The written exam was a breeze. Izuku's mind was a steel trap of analytical data, formulas, and history. He finished 20 minutes early, but it was the practical exam that mattered. Izuku stood in front of the massive gates of Battle Center B. He was wearing his green tracksuit, stretching his thick arms. Around him, dozens of other applicants were vibrating with nervous energy. He spotted the nice girl with the gravity quirk a few yards away, taking deep breaths. Suddenly, a strange sensation washed over Izuku. It started in his stomach, a deep, burning heat. It spread outward, radiating through his dense muscle fibers, rushing up his spine, and flooding into his limbs. It didn't feel like a foreign invader. It felt like a dormant furnace had suddenly been ignited. The buccaneer blood in his veins seemed to recognize the power, welcoming it, anchoring it down like a ship dropping anchor in a storm. One for all is awake, Izuku thought, looking at his hands. He clenched his fists. Sparks of emerald green lightning suddenly arced across his thick skin, crackling with raw, unbridled energy. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice blasted from the speakers. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! While the other students stood frozen in confusion, Izuku moved. He didn't just run. He exploded. Izuku channeled the power. He didn't know the percentages yet, but he felt the threshold. He allowed a fraction of 1 for all, roughly 10%, to flood into his legs, combining it with his astronomical baseline strength. Tum! The concrete at the starting line shattered into a spiderweb of craters. Izuku launched himself forward with the velocity of a cruise missile. To the other students, the giant boy simply vanished in a blur of green lightning and wind pressure, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. He cleared the gate and entered the fake city. A 3-point villain, a massive, tread-driven robot with heavy armor, rolled around the corner, locking its optical sensors onto him. Target acquired. Izuku didn't slow down. He didn't flinch. He remembered All Might's training. Control the wind pressure. Focus the kinetic energy. Izuku planted his left foot, pivoting his massive hips, and threw a right hook. He didn't swing wildly. It was a perfectly executed, incredibly tight martial arts strike, fueled by the buccaneer biology and 10% of 1 for all. His fist connected with the robot's armored chassis. Crunch. The sheer kinetic force didn't just dent the metal. It completely annihilated the structural integrity of the machine. The robot crumpled inward like a tin can hit by a sledgehammer, its internal circuitry exploding in a shower of sparks. The force of the blow was so condensed that the robot was violently thrown backward, skidding down the street before coming to a smoking halt. Izuku pulled his fist back. His knuckles were slightly red, but otherwise completely unharmed. His thick bones hadn't even registered the stress. 3 points, Izuku muttered, a wide, joyous smile breaking across his face. It works. My body can handle it. I can fight. The next 10 minutes were a display of systematic, overwhelming destruction. Izuku tore through the fake city like a force of nature. He didn't use flashy, massive shockwaves that could endanger the other applicants. He used precision and speed. He found a cluster of 2-pointers. He leaped into the air, landing in the center of them with an earth-shaking thud. Before they could fire their projectiles, Izuku delivered a spinning heel kick that decapitated one robot, then grabbed another by its mechanical arm, and used it as a club to smash a third. He was a blur of green lightning and raw, terrifying physical power. Up in the observation room, the faculty of UA High watched the monitors in stunned silence. Who is that kid in Battle Center B? The R-rated hero, Midnight, asked, leaning forward in her chair. He's built like a pro hero, but he's moving with the speed of a speed-type quirk. Izuku Midoriya, a tired, scratchy voice replied. Shota Aizawa, the underground hero Eraserhead, stared intently at the screen. Registered quirk, none. None? President Mike shouted. You gotta be kidding me, Eraser! Look at the lightning! Look at the power! That's clearly a quirk. His medical files say his physical build is a genetic anomaly, a latent bloodline mutation, but not a registered quirk. A small, bear mouse creature named Niza chimed in, sipping tea. It seems he has acquired an emitter-type quirk recently. But look at his technique. He's not just relying on power. He's pulling his punches precisely to avoid collateral damage to the other students. He has the situational awareness of a veteran. He's destroying the robots purely with blunt force, the hero snipe noted. And he's already racked up 60 points. He's practically secured his spot. Yes, Niza smiled, his black eyes glinting. But true heroism isn't just about destroying enemies. Let's see how they react to true despair. Niza pressed a large red button on his console. Back in Battle Center B, Izuku had just crushed a 1-pointer when the ground beneath his feet began to violently shake. The tremors were so intense that several students lost their footing, tumbling to the asphalt. The buildings at the far end of the street shattered like glass. Rising from the dust and debris was a mechanical titan. The zero-pointer. It was colossal, a towering behemoth of steel and treads that blotted out the sun. It dwarfed the buildings, its massive optical sensor glowing a menacing red. "What the hell is that?" a student screamed. "Run! It's the zero-pointer. We can't fight that." The applicants turned and fled in sheer terror, a stampede of desperate teenagers fleeing the advancing behemoth. Izuku stood his ground. He looked up at the machine. It was massive. But for the first time in his life, Izuku didn't feel small. He felt the buccaneer blood pumping in his veins, that slow, rhythmic drumbeat echoing in his chest. Thump thump. Thump thump. He turned to run, knowing the zero-pointer was worth no points. "Ow! Help!" Izuku stopped cold. He whipped his head around. Through the thick dust he saw her. The nice girl with the gravity quirk. She was trapped, her leg pinned under a massive slab of concrete that had fallen from a ruined building. She was desperately trying to push it off, but the zero-pointer's massive treads were rolling relentlessly toward her. She was in the direct path of destruction. Izuku didn't think. He didn't analyze. His body moved before his brain could process the danger. He planted his heavy boots into the asphalt. The green lightning crackling around him intensified, flaring violently. 10% isn't going to dent that thing, Izuku realized in a fraction of a second. I need more. I need enough kinetic energy to blow a hole right through it. He visualized the power of one for all as a roaring river inside him. He opened the floodgates, pushing past his safe limit. He pushed the power to 20%, channeling it entirely into his legs and his right arm. The strain was instant. Izuku's incredibly thick muscles groaned, the fibers tearing slightly under the overwhelming surge of energy. His skin bruised a deep purple along his forearm, the capillaries bursting. The pain was blinding, like liquid fire injected directly into his veins. But his bones, the thick, impossibly dense skeletal structure of the buccaneer bloodline, did not break. Smaaz! Izuku launched himself. The concrete beneath him didn't just crater, it exploded into dust. He shot into the air like a green comet, defying gravity with sheer, explosive kinetic force. He soared higher and higher, rocketing past the towering buildings, rising until he was face to face with the zero-pointer's colossal head. The robot's optical sensor locked onto him. Izuku pulled his right arm back. His bicep bulged grotesquely, the muscle fibers screaming in agony as 20% of one for all mixed with his 100% baseline buccaneer strength. The wind pressure around his fists began to warp the air, creating a visible sphere of localized pressure. He didn't hold back. He didn't suppress his nature. He let the giant out. With a roar that echoed across the entire battle center, Izuku threw the punch. The impact was cataclysmic. His fist struck the dead center of the zero-pointer's face. For a microsecond, everything was silent. And then, the kinetic energy detonated. A shockwave of unimaginable proportions erupted from his fist. The wind pressure didn't just dent the armor. It caved the entire front half of the colossal robot inward. The sheer force ripped through the machine's internal structure, blowing the back of its head completely off in a shower of shattered steel and wiring. The shockwave continued outward, parting the clouds above Yue high in a perfect circle, revealing the bright morning sun. The zero-pointer groaned, its massive body tilting backward. It hung in the air for a second before collapsing backward, crashing into the ruined fake city with a deafening, earth-shaking boom. Izuku hung in the air for a moment, suspended by the force of his own strike. He looked down at his right arm. It was a mess. The sleeve of his tracksuit was completely shredded. The skin was a canvas of deep purple and black bruises, and blood leaked from torn muscle tissue. It throbbed with agonizing, paralyzing pain. My arm, it's still attached, Izuku thought, panting heavily. The bones didn't shatter. The muscles tore, but my skeleton held together. I can still move my fingers. He twitched his index finger. It responded, though the pain made his vision white out for a second. Gravity reclaimed him. He began to plummet toward the earth. Okay, landing. I need to land, Izuku thought rapidly. I can't use my right arm. If I use one for all in my legs now, my torn muscles might give out and I'll crash. He angled his massive body, aiming for the side of a partially ruined building. As he fell, he extended his uninjured left arm. He slammed his gargantuan hand into the concrete wall of the building, his thick fingers gouging deeply into the stone. The friction tore the skin off his palm, but it slowed his descent. He dragged his hand down the side of the building, creating a deep trench in the concrete, acting as a human brake. He hit the ground, his heavy boots absorbing the remaining impact, cracking the asphalt beneath him. He stumbled to one knee, cradling his ruined right arm against his chest, gasping for breath. "Time's up!" President Mick's voice echoed through the city. Silence fell over Battle Center B. The remaining students slowly crept out from their hiding places, staring in absolute, stunned silence at the headless ruin of the zero-pointer, and then at the massive boy kneeling in the street. Uraraka, who had managed to pull her leg free during the chaos, stared at Izuku, her jaw practically on the floor. He destroyed that thing with one punch. To save me, a small, elderly woman with a syringe-shaped walking stick suddenly appeared, walking through the crowd. Out of the way, out of the way. Let me through. Recovery Girl, the cornerstone of UA's medical staff, marched up to Izuku. She looked up at the kneeling giant, shaking her head. "You foolish boy," she scolded, though her tone was gentle. She examined his ruined arm. "You channeled far too much power into this limb. Your muscle fibers are shredded." "I'm sorry," Izuku rasped, his deep voice strained with pain. "I had to stop it." Recovery Girl murmured, placing her lips against his bruised bicep. She activated her healing quirk. Izuku felt a sudden rush of extreme exhaustion as his body's natural healing process was hyper-accelerated. The purple bruises faded, the torn flesh knitted back together, and the bleeding stopped. Recovery Girl stepped back, looking at him with keen, clinical interest. "Remarkable. Anyone else who threw a punch with that much kinetic force would have turned their bones to absolute powder, but your skeletal structure is entirely intact. You're built like a tank, boy. But remember, even a tank's engine will melt if you redline it too long. Learn your limits, or next time, your thick bones won't save your muscles from snapping like rubber bands." "Yes, ma'am." Izuku bowed his head respectfully. He stood up, his arm fully healed but his stamina completely drained. He was so tired he felt like he could sleep for a week. He turned and began the slow, heavy walk toward the exit, ignoring the awestruck stares of the other applicants. He had done all he could. Now, he just had to wait. 1 week later, the Midoriya apartment was suffocatingly tense. Izuku sat at the tiny dining table, his massive knees pressed together, staring at a blank wall. He hadn't slept properly in days. He knew he had scored well in the villain points, but was it enough? What if they penalized him for destroying the zero-pointer? Inko Midoriya was pacing a hole into the floorboards. She was a bundle of raw nerves, glancing at the door every 5 seconds. Suddenly, the mail slot clicked. Inko practically dove across the room. She snatched the envelope off the floor, her hands trembling. "Izuku! It's here! It's from UA!" She hurried over, placing the thick envelope on the table in front of him. Izuku swallowed hard. His massive hands, which had shattered a giant robot a week prior, were shaking as he carefully tore the seal. A small metal disc slipped out of the envelope and clattered onto the table. Instantly, a holographic projection sprang to life. "I am here as a projection." All Might's booming voice filled the small kitchen. The hero appeared in his yellow suit, beaming brightly. Izuku gasped. "All Might? Why is he? You must be wondering why I am delivering this message, young Midoriya." The projection continued. "Well, I have accepted a teaching position at UA High. And I have the honor of delivering your results." The projection shifted, showing a scoreboard. "You scored a remarkable 60 villain points in the practical exam. A fantastic showing. However, UA does not grade on combat alone. A hero must also save others." A video feed played, showing Uraraka speaking to Present Mike after the exam, pleading with him to give Izuku some of her points because he had saved her. Izuku felt tears prick his eyes. She had tried to help him. A heroic action is its own reward. All Might boomed. "You risked your life to save a fellow student. And for that, the judges awarded you 60 rescue points." The scoreboard updated. Izuku Midoriya, 120 points. First place. "You shattered the entrance exam record, young Midoriya." All Might smiled, pointing directly at the camera, seemingly looking right into Izuku's soul. Come, Izuku. This is your Hero Academia. The hologram fizzled out, leaving the kitchen in total silence. Izuku sat perfectly still. The tension in his massive shoulders finally released. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a tear tracing down his scarred cheek. He had done it. The giant was going to UA. Across the table, Inko Midoriya began to cry. She didn't wail or sob. She simply let the tears of pure, overwhelming joy fall down her face. She looked at her massive, beautiful son, the boy who had been called a freak, a monster, a quirkless nobody his entire life. She reached out, her small hands resting on the table, and slowly, softly, she began to tap her fingers against the wood. Thump thump. Thump thump. Izuku looked up. Inko smiled through her tears, the rhythm steady and triumphant. It was the rhythm she had taught him when he was a little boy crying over his sighs. The rhythm of the sun god. The rhythm of the warrior of liberation. The drums had sounded. The dawn had arrived.